Thanks so much. I'm so glad to be here. Megan didn't say that I actually requested to speak. I'm really, really glad to be here, and I'm thinking I'll probably offend everyone at some point. So there's also that. Okay, that's me on the head of the Rocky statue in front of the Philly Museum. I just thought that would be a great idea for a press photo. I'm going to be talking, I have like a rant it'll take about 17 minutes, I don't know, I kind of timed it. And then I will talk about my work after the rant. So, I don't want to waste any time either. I want to begin with this thought. Art does not progress. Picasso famously quipped when visiting the caves of Lascaux, which are 12,000 years old, "We have learned nothing." However, obviously, technology progresses. Movies, for example, are innovative, not because of the images or the stories that they tell, but for the method of delivery. What does it mean to be innovative in stained glass? Peter Schjeldahl, in a New Yorker review of stained glass windows by renowned painters Gerhard Richter, this is Gerhard Richter, and Sigmar Polk, said, "My own keenest pleasure in stained glass occurs at first glance, a wow moment, like the here and gone dazzle of fireworks. To be sustained, the experience calls for an organizing idea, a ruling fiction, making disorientation meaningful." Stained glass has been an art form since the Middle Ages, but has always stood outside mainstream fine art history. It has also been separate from glass art history, which really only became a thing in 1962 when Harvey Littleton and Dominic Labino brought it to Ohio. And they began the first college glass art classes and were part of what is known as the studio craft movement. Dale Chihuly is probably the most notable glass artist who came out of that class with Harvey. It's worth noting that the studio craft movement, worked hard for mainstream fine art acceptance, and I will say more on that in a second. Before the studio craft movement, there was a tradition of vessel designers like Lalique, etc., but it wasn't attempting to be sculpture or claiming to be fine art. The history of stained glass precedes the studio glass movement by centuries. However, the studio glass art movement has been somewhat reluctant to recognize stained glass as a part of glass art history. That may have changed a bit, but it's important to realize that institutions such as galleries, museums, and guilds, such as the Glass Art Society, have, for the most part, included stained glass mostly as an afterthought with token examples. There are shockingly few stained glass pieces in the Corning Museum. So innovation in stained glass occurred in an isolated environment and tends to reflect technology of tools and equipment over trends in the fine arts. So just to review the major innovations, in the Middle Ages, the introduction of the Gothic arch and the flying buttress to cathedral architecture liberated architecture so that it could accommodate massive amounts of stained glass, such as Sainte-Chapelle. And I will just share with you that when I heard Notre Dame burnt down, my first thought was, oh my God, thank God it's not Sainte-Chapelle. Although this window did survive, and I'm happy. For my dollar, the apotheosis of the medium is the medieval, and it's downhill from there. So now you know what I think. In the 1300s, the inclusion of silver stain allowed for sections of glass to include the color yellow without cutting a separate yellow piece of glass. And therefore, we were able to invent the yellow cloverleaf brazier. In the 1400s, the Protestant Reformation certainly had an effect, both positive and negative. This included the smashing of a lot of windows in England, and that basically put the colored glass makers out of business. So artists making stained glass were forced to get creative with enamels as well as they had to get creative in terms of finding secular commissions. So this is a window that's been reassembled from smashed fragments, as are these. So they reassembled the shards of broken glass into what can only be assumed are the first postmodernist works of art ever. I just find these quarries to be so charming that I have to share them with you. I don't have anything to say about them, but you know, we think of medieval art as being very, like they couldn't draw, like they drew kind of stick figures that were kind of fleshy, but actually they could draw just fine. It just, like, they got all inhibited when they had to draw Jesus. All right, and then this is a rondel from the same period, you know, a vanitas. Between the 1400s and the 1800s, basically very little happened in stained glass that could actually be called innovative, or maybe nothing. The next innovations were, in Europe, artists like Morris and Company and the Gothic Revival and the arts and crafts movement revived the medium in both churches and in homes. In the United States, we have Tiffany and Lafarge, and of course, one of them thought of copper foil. So there's that, for better or worse. World War II created a demand to replace windows in bombed-out churches, and that brought a creative boom in Germany, where modernism reigned, and in England, to some extent, all over Europe, really. Hans Gottfried von Stockhausen started making what he called autonomous panels. And I specifically want to point this out because this is the tradition that I specifically come from, as my teacher, Ursula Huth, was a student of von Stockhausen. And in fact, what she would say to me is that we are making autonomous panels. And that's what I call them, autonomous panels. So where do we find ourselves today? Warning, I have an agenda. Sorry. But you have to listen to me because I have the mic. One hears a lot these days that the apartheid of craft and fine art is over, and we can all go home happy because fibers, glass, and ceramics are finally accepted as art with a capital A. And indeed, it seems like it is receiving artistic respect it deserves. And considering that I am one who is accepted in the fine arts world to a degree, you may find it very surprising that I have a problem with this. But frankly, it all seems, one, not actually true, and two, it's only true if what you mean are that already established painters and sculptors are recognized for dabbling in craft media. Those of us who have devoted our lives to it remain under-acknowledged, if not anonymous. I am truly grateful to be an exception. I do not think that the goal of practitioners, however, should be groveling for validation from the blue-chip fine arts establishment. Now I have to try to get my cursor to work on the laptop. Is it over here? All right, if I just give up. Mainly because, in my opinion, as someone who sort of straddles both worlds, we might, get acceptance in fine arts, and then we would just be the inheritor of all their horrible problems, and I don't see why that's such a great deal anyway. So, in case you didn't read this, it says the American Craft Museum changed their name in 2002, eliminating the word craft. Thanks for nothing. As far as I can tell, stained glass is still seen primarily as something one experiences in a religious building. And I just wanted to show you this window. It's in my area outside of Philadelphia, and it is one of the 7 wonders of the stained glass world. There's actually 10 of these. They're about, 50 feet high. They're enormous. They're like 5 feet wide, to give you some idea. Just amazing windows. Outside of that, stained glass is only seen as relevant as home decor or enhancement of public spaces. In short, it is still the handmaid of architecture, for better or for worse. It must be acknowledged that part of stained glass's credibility issue is that there is an overwhelming amount of kitsch out there. And by kitsch, I just mean stuff that is soporifically cutesy or generally idiotic, that do not make the tiniest of demands on the viewer and seem like junk food for the eyes. I might have chosen a different slide, but I thought it was really funny that they're trying to sell this cracked thing on Etsy. By its nature, being created of radiant colored light, stained glass is perfect for delivering a profound spiritual message. The designer of Saint-Denis in 1200, the Abbot Suger, said stained glass is enlightenment embodied, and that can be a manifest fact. However, that's an enormous promise, and for the most part, stained glass doesn't deliver that. The disappointment gap is incredible. We expect nothing less than transcendence, and often we just receive trivia. No wonder we resent it. It's fair to say that many stained glass makers are not trying to make art or be innovative. Craft as a field is very democratic, which is another reason why we might not want to be called fine artists all the time. There are a lot more hobbyists willing to attempt a craft project than an oil painting or a sculpture. And if you ask me, the reason is mainly because the gates of the fine arts are lined with booby traps, and it is much more likely that you will make an idiot of yourself. However, the amount of lousy stained glass art has the effect of poisoning people against it. And so we look to the fine arts for rescue. Kiki Smith, Judy Chicago, Gerhard Richter, Sigmar Polk, Wim Delvoye, Kehinde Wiley are all examples of well-known fine artists who've made stained glass pieces. Are they innovative? No. I kind of think this window is kind of innovative. I think the more, it depends on the piece and the artist and how much they actually worked on it themselves, as I will get to in a second. Sadly, in the case of Judy Chicago and Kehinde Wiley, to a knowledgeable stained glass artist, their use of stained glass is usually a simple equation. Certain subjects have not yet been done in the medium most obviously associated with the spiritual. Plug in that subject matter and voila. The use of glass is relegated to a symbol of sanctity, and therefore its use is as recognizable and trite as possible. That's a real shame, because I think these could have been extraordinary windows. It also really bothers me that these were fabricated by a Czech studio. Now, I will just say, too bad Judson's not here. I think Judson should have made these windows. Then they'd be killer. And then there are artists like Kirsten Bratch, who probably no one's ever heard of, who was celebrated by Art Forum, on the cover of Art Forum, in an article that revealed the writer had not done even the slightest, even teeny-weeniest bit of research ever, and proclaimed her the reinventor of stained glass. That's not a quote, that's what I remember. For the record, I will say I absolutely love this weird window. But I don't think that she reinvented, rescued, resurrected, revived, reanimated stained glass at all. What she did was she made her own decent contribution. This really eats me. It feels that our field is being colonized. Artists like Gerhard Richter discover glass and then get credit for being innovated, or even more insufferable, they get credit for rediscovering the lost medium of stained glass when it's been done before and ignored. It bothers me that the stained glass ideas of mainstream artists are seen as more brilliant, more important, more interesting, and more relevant than, say, Ludwig Schaffrath, John Piper, Narcissus Quagliata, Tom Denny, and just because these are all recognizable names, I thought I would mention Masakubi Nakamura, who I've never heard of this guy until I followed his Instagram. I don't know anything about him. I mean, I'm assuming it's a him. It could be a woman for all I know, or they, them. These people are brilliant artists as well as brilliant fabricators. The point needs to be made. Stained glass is a small field, but it is not without creative, original thinkers who have innovated the medium from the inside perspective of deep knowledge of the process, material, and tradition. We have our own makers who are brilliant artists as well as brilliant fabricators, and they reinvented stained glass, not some interloper. One more word, and I promise I'll get off my soapbox, but this is really near and dear to me, and why I consider my own work to be innovative. So I'm asking you to consider this point, which is kind of tangential. For centuries now, only a Philistine would say out loud that they find it disappointing when an artist doesn't fabricate their own work. From Rubens to Koons, it is a widely accepted practice. Why should I dare challenge that, besides the fact that I may possibly also be a Philistine? In one sense, I don't have a problem with who fabricates something, as long as they're the best person for the job. But I want to point out that rather than just sort of blind acceptance of this practice, the outcomes of work made by the person who had the idea in the first place are going to be different if they make the piece than if someone else made it. Meaning that while I work on my pieces, I'm improvising, and I'm being spontaneous, and I'm changing my mind. I do not end up with the same piece I set out to make at the beginning. So there you go. I can say that without a doubt, every single time I make a piece, that's what happens. And as a result, the piece I end up with exceeds my original conception. So it's possible that I could find a studio somewhere to fabricate my work, to painstakingly reproduce my drawings in the colors I chose, but that would be the sum of it all. What you're seeing, or what you're about to see in my work, isn't that. It's a case of me responding in real time to the creative act and changing things in dialogue with the process, and the result is better than the sum of its parts, and better than what I had in mind in the first place. So this is what I'm working on right now, and this is what those 3 windows look like made. So, and I'll talk about this piece at the end. All right, and now, Judith Schaechter, TMI. This brings me to me. That's me. This is my first stained glass window ever, I confess. We used to make these, highly toxic things in our ovens at home. And this is the 3rd stained glass window I ever made. And the head, it's hard to see, but the head is a slumped piece of glass that I made like a sculpture out of clay, and then I made a plaster mold and slumped the glass. These, there it is. This piece here, I couldn't cut that shape. So I just cut it in little chunks and glued it together with airplane model cement. I went to the Rhode Island School of Design. I do not have a degree higher than a bachelor's. I was a painting major. And as I was saying downstairs to some of the students that are here tonight, we were talking about how you find your authentic self as an artist, which is such a fascinating question, one that I can't answer very well. But I will say, I went to school to be an oil painter. I had had a lot of prior oil painting experience, and so there was no reason to doubt that I was going to be an oil painter. However, I found, much to my complete dismay and horror, I actually hate oil painting. So that's kind of a problem. It's dirty, it's disgusting and smelly. Anyway, I saw what they were doing with Ursula Huth's class. She was a graduate student, and she was teaching them how to sandblast flash glass. And I got very excited, and I wanted to make a piece for my bedroom. So I took the class, and I've been doing it for 40 years. But in terms of finding my voice, I had always done a lot of doodling. And I'd always been told to stop it. Like, I was passing in papers to my English class and my math class that basically looked like this, and they were saying, stop doing this. And I never thought of this as art because by the time I got to art school, I thought, art was like Picasso. It was very serious. You had to be extremely profound. And all of that was so inhibiting that I just choked. I couldn't make anything, basically. So when I took the stained glass class, I had no respect for stained glass whatsoever. I just thought, the next class I'll take is probably, macrameing a plant holder. So that's the respect I had for it. I will say RISD did not encourage me to respect stained glass, but University of the Arts in Philadelphia did. Just a thought. And I decided to do some of my doodles in stained glass, and that's what the prior slide was, and which you had to look at way too long. And that was what got me going. After that, I was so in love with doing this, I didn't care if you called it art or illustration or dimensional cremo or crap. I was going to keep doing it no matter what you threw at me because I was in love. And this is just a bunch of pieces I did early on, all of them at once, so I'm not going to even talk about them. I used to lead my work. Now sometimes I lead it again. And now I'm leading things because everyone's scared of lead. I have a suggestion for the rehabilitation of lead in the public eye, a slogan. It's lead, the sexy metal. All right. I want to talk about technical stuff in my work. I don't always wear a respirator, but when I do, it's because Joe Beyer makes me. I fabricate my biggest pieces at Beyer's Gallery now. The thing I'm most known for is, the thing that sort of defines the look of my work is working in layers of flash glass. So if you will look at this section here. On the left, that's all the three layers together. If there are people in the audience who don't know what flash glass is, it is a hand-blown glass that has a very thin veneer of color. It's made, when the glass blower makes a bubble, it's clear or something pale like yellow or pink. And then on top of that, they gather a color and then they blow it out like a balloon and make a big cylinder. And ultimately, I get this material and I can remove the red. So I am sandblasting it and working with power tools and hand tools to remove color. And then I'm stacking it in layers. So on the left is the red on clear layer. That's red on clear with black enamel fired onto it. This is blue on clear with black enamel. And this is pink on clear. That's probably yellow cold paint, but I silver stain these days. I silver stained for a while, then I stopped, and then I went back to it. And then you put them all together and you get that image on the left. And you're thinking, what about spontaneity and all that crap she just talked about? Well, I did not have a color drawing for this. I had a very, like a black and white line drawing. The colors were a surprise to me, a good surprise. And apropos of standing on the shoulders of giants, I did not invent this technique. Many artists have done it. In fact, the medieval artists braided flash glass with something like an emery cloth. But it was such a pain in the butt to do it, which I well know because I do hand tools too. They would only do like the whites of the eyes and stuff like that. But Harry Clark, when was Harry Clark? Does anyone know? Very like 1900, 1890, something like that. He was working in layers of flash glass, similar to what I do. But as you can see, our styles are very different. Is there a way to turn the lights off that are on the screen? I just noticed that. Just a thought, okay. All right. This is the piece that's downstairs, which also has a lot of face light on it that is unnecessary. And it's called Human Nature. First, I'm going to show you how I made the face. The face is a piece of red on clear flash glass. So the first thing I do is I cut the piece of glass out, and then I take it to my basement where I have a sandblaster, and I sandblast it very lightly so that all it is frosted red glass. And then I draw on that frosted surface with a permanent marker, an extra fine point Sharpie for those of you taking notes. And then I start working at it with an engraving tool. There's a zillion billion kinds of engraving tools. I used to use a Fordham flex shaft. Now I use something called a Nakanishi Emax Evolution, but it's basically a dentist drill, and it's got diamond points in it. And I'm also working with hand files. You're going to see this because I have a little movie of it coming up. The hand filing thing is something that I invented. And I just want to say that out loud many, many times at every single lecture I ever give, because I invented that. And except for the medieval people who used like something, I don't know what they used, but I teach it, and I've seen artists claim, like they don't, you know, they get credited for doing something and they don't say where they learned it. Just kind of bothers me. Then I cut out a blue piece and I sandblast that, and I draw on that with magic marker too. And ultimately, in this case, I have a pink piece. And as you can see, I took more off the red. I'm pointing at the screen. Do you see? You see? And you put them all together in a stack, and it works like a color separation. So it has a lot of depth. And this is the parts for the side. They're a piece of red and blue flash glass also. And on the left is a sort of beginning version, and then on the right is when I start working with the tools. And here on the left, I've added the silver stain and black paint. And on the right, that is pink oil paint. It's not fired on, it's not enamel, it's not pink glass. It's actually transparent oil paint, which I've rubbed into the sandblasting. It's not UV safe, so if you are a practitioner of stained glass making, you cannot hang something like this in sunlight. It has to be in a light box, or else that pink will, I've put pieces in windows to see how long they last. It's really not long, like a couple months. Another example is this more recent piece called The Florist. And here's some of the background. And this is what the layers look like separate. So what we have here is this piece is made up of these two and nothing else. There is nothing missing from these two pieces. You put them together and this is what you get. Same with these, make that, and these make this one. I did not know that I could make something that looked like a convincing image of a glass in glass. I got like all jiggy about that. So I made a zillion of them. Like the original was gonna have like 5 of them. But I got carried away. And in this piece, I'll show you the upper bird area here. This is the red. What I noticed with students is they are absolutely terrified to sandblast the color off, but sometimes you got to get rid of a lot of the color to make it look nice. This is the blue. I think that's pink enamel on the back. And this is what they look like together. And this piece, this is the top part, this part here. This was really all improv. So the sketch looked like this. And it is sort of faithfully following that in some ways, but there's a whole lot of stuff going on in between these sort of clumps where I was just playing around and having a lot of fun, I have to say. This is what the 3 layers look like apart. And I don't know if you can tell, but there's this piece broke while I was working on it. I did have someone not buy the piece because of that. You know what? I did not have to stick a copper foil line there. I could have done nothing, or I could have glued it, But I felt like I was going to be all transparent. I don't have a problem with that line there. It's like, really? That ruins it for you. Wow, touchy. You don't get to have my piece. So there. Anyway, and like explaining broken glass to people really makes me tired. But that's what glass does, is it breaks. Every single stained glass ever has some broken glass in it, and it's like, as long as the window is together, I don't see that we have a problem. All right, and here's another example of the technique. This piece is also interesting because I often make the figures separately. I make them in glass, and then I store them in boxes because I don't know what I'm going to do around them yet. And it took years for me to come up with the design. And finally, after years of swimming laps, when I visited my dad, I would meditate on this window and think about, what am I going to do? I was so in love with this figure, I couldn't figure out what to do with it that would be good enough. It was so horrible. And finally, I got the image in my head of this sine curve. No bird, no flowers, just that this figure would look good with this swoopy line over it. And then I had to figure out what narrative imagery would fit on top of that sine curve. And I came up with the idea. The bird was originally going to be pooping the flowers, but then it seemed like it would be better if it was barfing the flowers. And I found out later that when a bird really likes you, it barfs on you. I didn't know that when I made the piece, because it thinks you're a baby and it wants to feed you, right? This is the layers of the head. So the way I work these things is I'm mostly thinking about one layer at a time. I'm not trying to do all 3 layers at once. So I did a ton of work on that blue thing. Like it was basically looked like that before I moved on to the red. And the pink was the last, because the pink basically has nothing done to it. It's just like sandblasted, sort of generally with some yellow on it. And these are the plates for the bouquet of flowers. And this is what they look like when they were being worked on. There's no silver stain or pink paint on the left-hand side, but the right-hand side, there is. But ultimately, I put a 3rd layer of pink glass on it, so it looks like this. So that was what it looked like before the pink layer got put on it. It's actually a piece of Lambert's Aurora. You know, it's like $1,000 a square foot right now. This was a piece where I was having a lot of fun playing with the layers. Basically, I was teaching 3 classes that semester at 3 different educational institutions in Philly, and I knew that I wasn't going to have a lot of time in the studio, so I decided I would make 50 lozenges, and each lozenge would be sort of based on a face card and a deck of cards. It would be a woman with her hand holding a flower. And I was just gonna make 50 of them, full stop, not think about anything. And then I was gonna play around with what they looked like together. And of course, there's thousands of possibilities, thousands of orientations. But I just chose some of my favorite ones and put them together. And it's called Passengers because I was watching that serial sci-fi show called Manifest. Did anyone watch Manifest? It's really good. Which I think was it was like Lost. It was kind of like based on maybe that airplane, Malaysia Flight 370. So I was thinking about like what a scuba diver is going to find someday. It's going to look like this. So this thing, besides like going crazy with layers of flash glass, which is not something I invented, the idea of filing into it with a file is the thing that I have basically invented myself. I was working with the electric tools, and I just thought they don't have to be plugged in because they're diamond tools and they will abrade the glass. And I started looking into files. I found, well, I tried a number of things before finding Starlight files, which you can get from his Glassworks. And I just started doing this, which makes me happy. I could do this for like 1,000 hours a day. And now I have a video, so you can see. Of course, it takes forever. So this is a speeded up video. So that is the engraving tool. That looks like a flexible shaft. That looks like a Fordham. And that is the file. And I am using a lot of water. Someone freaked out on YouTube because they didn't see me putting water on it. There's tons of water. It gets water everywhere. I go through, I don't know how many bath towels mopping this stuff up. That's a different engraving tool. See, I think that the young people refer to this kind of behavior as self-soothing. Apparently I need to self-soothe a lot. Otherwise, I'd be out robbing cars. Banks, I don't know, some. But I'm very soothed. And there you go. And these are the files themselves. They're only about $13 a piece, so I buy lots of them at once, and then I customize the tips so that some of them are like wedges, and sometimes I even glue new stuff on them. And they all wear in different ways. They become your friends. I also paint on glass in some sort of quasi-traditional way. Here's the close-up of this piece. If there's Q&A, you can ask me why I did this picture. I don't know, though. So I work in stages. This is a piece of sandblasted glass. I like the textured surface. And I just coat it with some gray glass paint and then do what's called a trace line and fire it. And then I go in and maybe paint a little more. But then I also start working it with the files. I would rather paint the stuff on and take it off with a file than paint precisely, if that makes any sense. I'm just a carving kind of human being. And then I go back and forth between painting and carving and firing until I have a completed thing. And the quarries for that piece, there's a close-up of them. This piece, I wanted to make a point about my attitude. I was always a very sort of underachieving kind of person as a student when I was younger. And so I wasn't a particularly good craftsman at first. And I took kind of a lazy approach. But at some point, it became very important to me to demonstrate that I would go to these sort of insane lengths to make the piece as hard as possible for me. And in turn, I would be sort of demonstrating to anyone who might look at the piece what I was willing to sacrifice to make it worth your looking at it and investing your time and energy into it. So, and this piece also, I tore it apart. This was the solution on Friday night. And then I smashed it with a hammer and replaced it with this solution. This is it with face light. And this is all the little tiny rocks that go into this. I could make this in layers of flash glass, and it could just be one piece of glass or a couple. But I wanted to make it as impossible as possible. And of course, the theme of the crawling man comes from my vast collection of predecessors who have made images of crawling men, especially Lucas Cranach, who did this one. This is a very recent piece from last year called Here I Come. And this piece, the Wichita Art Museum bought this piece, and I just recently spoke about it, but their press said it was about the resiliency and wonder of childhood. And I was like, oh God, it's actually to me about menopause and climate change. How am I gonna? I hope I'm not undermining their curatorial staff by announcing that publicly, and so anyway, that's the sketch. But before I settled on that sketch, I did all of these sketches and more. This is just a smattering of them. And then, once I had the figure that I liked, I then couldn't settle on a background. I tried, I don't know, it felt like hundreds of things before settling on this. I was particularly keen on the fact that the cut lines are in front of the running girl, which is like sort of pointing out the absurdity of a drawn landscape. And it really was about climate change and menopause to me. You know, it's just a giant hot flash. And climate change is going to suck for women having hot flashes. I'm very willing to make a piece over again if I don't like the first version, although I don't usually make them both. Usually one of them ends up in a scrap pile. This is one where I made both. And this one I made the figure 3 times, and I assembled them as studies, excuse me. And, but this is the final version. And this one, the bottom right, this piece, it's at the Corning Museum, but I made it 4 times before. And this piece, and this piece here, and this piece here ended up in the trash. And this one I assembled with a different figure in it, and this is the final version. I was a whole lot of craziness in my head, is what that was. But I'm really happy with how it came out. It was worth it. Okay, so how do I come up with these ideas? I don't know. There's this painting, and there's this painting, and there's this political cartoon from 1573 on the right. And if you squish them all together in my brain, this is what they come out like. The drawing for this took 6 months. And this is what the layers look like separately. All right, thus ends me talking about technique. Now I'm going to say something about conceptual innovation. And to remind myself of what to say, I'm going to talk about the idea of stained glass as a medium for personal expression, and also some contemporary themes in my work. So, personal expression, stained glass, it's good for that. I don't know what to say. A lot of people think my work is depressing. Like, it really depends. Not everyone is willing to come up to me and say something that's challenging or critical. That ends the minute you walk out the doors of art school. No one ever says that stuff to you again, unless they're your partner, and then you want to kill them. But every now and then I hear things. Actually, family members are like, "Why is your work so depressing?" And so this piece is called "The Life Ecstatic." It's not depressing. I rest my case, Your Honor. I do not think my work as depressing. I actually think it's uplifting, and maybe that is not how everyone else sees it, but I am not even remotely interested in adding to the gross domestic depression of our country or planet. I feel like that just takes care of itself quite nicely. I guess what I think of as an artist is that art can be kind of like artists can be like sewage treatment plants. I will take in the negative energy and I will turn it into this beautiful object. The people who have found, especially my early work, really objectionable and violent, I think I have never made anything as violent as life. No one's ever actually hurting anybody in my windows anymore anyway, maybe a little when I was really young. This piece, this piece was inspired by these images. I remember one day I saw this somewhere on Tumblr, and I thought, oh my God, that's the most inspiring thing I've seen in like years. I couldn't wait to make my version in stained glass, which was going to be the meme of a guy on a desert island, right? So this is the final piece. And this is some details. I just want to point out to you that as a maximalist, this area here was really difficult. This area here was really fun. So anyway, I had a great honor to do an installation at the Eastern State Penitentiary Historical Site in Philadelphia, which included this giant window. I actually made 17 windows for prison cells. And I wasn't going to make this window, but the administrator of the site wanted me to. This was the original sketch, which was, I had to do it in, it felt like, a day. Just like putting together stuff in Photoshop as fast as possible. And then I made it in stained glass without a lot of editing, because this was the biggest window I made at the time. It's in Rochester, so go see it. And here's some details. It's called The Battle of Carnival and Lent. And so what I was thinking about was everybody who's in prison, and when I say prison, I don't necessarily mean prison. I mean like you could be in your own mental prison without being incarcerated. Anyone who is in a prison of any sort has maybe lost the battle of an angel on one shoulder and the devil on another. And so I was going to do the 7 cardinal virtues, battling it out with the 7 deadly sins. That was my original conception. But as I started working on the drawing, I realized I do not believe in sin and virtue as separate things. They're all together smushed into people all at once, and I could not possibly draw that. So it's just a bunch of clowns fighting it out. Of course, I'm interested in climate change because I'm horrified that we're going to have it. So I started, my work started to sort of gradually shift. I'm not so interested in doing images of human beings anymore, although I'm about to show you a piece that will make you think I am completely full of it. So someone asked me in an interview just the other day, like, what's your favorite piece? And all I could think about was this one. I mean, I have a lot of favorite pieces, but this is one of my favorites, especially recently. And I was, I just wanted to make a piece that would evoke sympathy for animals that we are destroying their habitats or doing things to them that we shouldn't be doing. During COVID, I got interested in making a version of the Raft of the Medusa. I didn't want to do anything like the actual original because it's such a brilliant painting, and that if I tried to do something anything like it, I would just be like showing off how terrible I am compared to Jericho. So it had to be different enough so that no one would draw any comparisons. So I did a drawing that looked like this. And I was happy with the drawing. I became obsessed with pencils during COVID. Because when you work with pencils, you can wear flip-flops. You cannot do that with glass. I'm also interested in endless repeating design. So I made this design, and then in Photoshop, I colored it and turned it into an endless repeating design, which could easily be manufactured as wallpaper for your powder room or wherever you want it. And it was inspired by the Black Lives Matter protests, which I was not participating in because I was scared of getting COVID, basically. And but I felt really bad about that because it was something that, I felt it was an important cause, and I would have liked to have felt better about actually doing that. I eventually did make a stained glass window on the same theme, which also endlessly repeats, but in a different tile. I swiped someone else's lead line pattern. I wanted a very sort of contrasty pattern for the leading. This is actually a leaded piece. Because I wanted, first of all, I wanted to show that the people were struggling. They're struggling to get along, in my mind. There's a lot of moments in this piece that are not just horrible. This is my favorite part, though, the dysfunctional couple. And then there's some, scenes of actual tenderness in here. So they're not all just like, they're sort of like poking each other. There's no one's stabbing each other, shooting each other. They're just kind of writhing. And that's sort of my feeling, is that in some ways we are trying to get along, and there's sort of forces greater than ourselves, our own biology perhaps, that keep making it very difficult. And I wanted to say something about that. Also during COVID, I started walking, which I had only ridden a bicycle before. I shuffled around because my hip flexors had gotten so tight. Anyway, and what I noticed in walking around was that there were a lot of people walking around that were carrying bags of poop. And I found this fascinating, and I wanted to make a work of art about how we all walk through life with a little bag of doo-doo. A lot of people look at this and think it's, like if people from Philadelphia think it's Central Park, and people from New York think it's like Rittenhouse Square, it's neither, it's just some generic city from my imagination. I just wanted to see if I could make a convincing looking cityscape. And this was a piece I made that was on the theme of keeping the water supply pure rather than, like what's happening in Flint, Michigan and stuff like that. Like, keep it pure. All right, I'm coming towards the end here. I did axe-wielding maniacs in 2020. This was going to be I wanted to make a piece about deforestation. And I wanted to connect it to sort of basically toxic masculinity, but of course I want men to like me, so I didn't want to be too mean about it, but I am still groveling, it's terrible. So the way I feel is that people are forced into these gender stereotypes and no one is benefiting. And the planet is suffering as a result. So I wanted to do sort of an image of a guy cutting down a tree. So I needed a picture of a lumberjack, so I drew 7 of them. And then I liked all 7, so I stuck them all together, and they're all chopping these truncated logs that are in no way suggestive of phallic symbols whatsoever. And this is also an endless repeating design that could easily be made into, I don't know, clothing. Here's a close-up. This was probably the most fun I had making a piece in a long time. All right, so what am I doing in my studio these days? Right now, I am, and have been for about a year, and apparently for the unforeseeable future, I am an artist in residence at the Penn Center for Neuroaesthetics. Neuroaesthetics is a branch of cognitive neuroscience. That's the kind where they don't slice into your brain with knives. They just think about your brain and do a lot of fMRIs and eye tracking. So they're artists in residence, and I go to their lab meetings, and I am making art in response to this experience. So this piece is called The Swarm. It's 5 feet wide, 60 inches wide. And I was challenging myself to invent as many flies as possible. And I wanted to sort of represent the idea of emergent phenomenon. But my main piece for this is I am making a church for one person. I'm 62 and no church will have me. I've never even been approached by a church ever. And so I have to build my own church now. And that is actually the church builder in the church. That's Patrick. And I am building a church that will only have one person in it at a time. One of the things at the Penn Center for Neuroaesthetics that they study is the effect of architecture on cognition. So they want to know if a space filled with plants is better for learning or for memory or something like that. So of course they mean like, you know, a wall with living ferns on it, or moss, and like maybe a bamboo ceiling. But I am just going to, I don't have to make anything that's like too tightly exactly like what they're doing. Some of the inspiration was the idea of a planetarium or a greenhouse. And so there's 9 panels down here, which you saw these, you're going to see them again. And then there's 36 up here. And I have made 3 of them. I'm working on 4, so there's 9 of them. And this is the first time I've worked with an assistant in years, because I don't like working with assistants because I like working naked. No. Just kidding. I like to sing, which is worse. And anyway, so poor Constantine does all the glass cutting. Also, I have arthritis, and I'm tennisinitis. I have all kinds of horrific things going on with my body, and I'm not so sure how long I'm going to be able to do this. So I thought it would be a really good idea to break down and hire Constantine to make the do the cutting. Fortunately, he's sheer perfection. So these are just some details, and there's precious little left of this talk. Here's some links for you, which I can, I don't know how I will disseminate. Get out your cameras now. And so that's me, that's my blog, that's my YouTube channel where I do demos. I had to teach remotely during COVID. That was the worst nightmare. This is my gallery. This is the Penn Center for Neuroaesthetics, and that's my Instagram. This is the AGG, and this is the organization of Megan McElfresh, the SGAA. Thank you. Questions? Yes?
Technical question. When you're working on the 2 different layers of glass that are going to go on top of each other, do you actually place them on top of each other when you're working on them?
Eventually. Not at first. Constantine is now placing them to draw a template for the second one so that it's the exact same size, so there's that. But in order to make the image, if I start thinking too much about what's going to go on the other layer, my head explodes. It explodes really easily. I'm a very delicate snowflake. So for example, with this flower here, there's a detail of it on this. I basically did everything on the blue layer before doing anything on the red. It doesn't matter if you do the red or the blue first, as long as you don't do them both at the same time. I'm going to use I pronouns. I don't know what's best for you. But for me, I got to work on one at a time. And I got to do a lot of work on it. So for example, I did almost everything to the blue on this area too, which you can see it's a kind of a decent sized chunk here, like that big. These flowers are big. All these flowers are like this big. And each section includes something that looks vaguely naughty. Other questions? Does that answer your question? Yes?
If you're working this big, when you scale up, how do you control all of the variables when you try to scale up? Or are you just doing more small pieces in a larger block?
I think it's the latter. I don't think I'm a very good thinker. I'm not planning this out ahead of time. One reason, first of all, I think it maybe makes sense that I don't do a lot of commissions because the thing is changing. I could maybe come up with a drawing and present it to a client and hope that they would be really okay if it changed a lot while I was working on it. But one of the things I liked about stained glass over oil painting was, like, to me, the worst nightmare was you'd stretch a canvas and then you'd paint on it and it would totally be the wrong size for whatever the hell it was I was making. It would either be too little or too big, but it was never, ever, ever the right size. So with stained glass, I was, like, my first things, I was just sort of working out from the middle and then at some point turning it into a square and assembling it. So it ended when it ended, and I didn't have to have a size. This is also the advantage of the autonomous panel.
You ever do lamps or anything?
I did a lamp once. It was it wasn't like Tiffany style. It was only like 12 pieces of glass, and it was like a circus train. It was like 10 panels in like an octagon with a top and a bottom. And I filled it with those fake candles, so it looked like the train was on fire. I think I made 2 of them for an auction. This is back when I was generous. I no longer do things like that for auctions. But yeah, and I think that's the only lamp I ever made. If I made another one, I don't remember. It's possible.
Do you make lamps?
I just retired as an architect, and I'm trying to take over the lamp making world. And I made my first lamp out of collecting sea glass. I walked the beach with my nieces and nephews and collected glass, and then turned it into a lampshade. And then I thought, well, I can do a Tiffany style. God, I suck. So I really tried, and I'm going to try again. So hopefully I learn from this and get better.
I think it's hard to make three-dimensional stuff without the solder leaking through, but they do make those forms. I think it's interesting that an architect would make lamps. Why aren't you making architectural pieces?
I was an architect for 4 years, and I need something different.
Okay.
So I didn't want to call the following the codes and doing that. I liked it, but try something different.
Gotcha. That makes sense. Yes?
When you layer glass, is blue always on the bottom and red always on top, or do you switch it up?
Oh no. Generally speaking, blue is on the bottom and red is on the top, but especially when I started layering mainly because I had my studio when I started out was so tiny and my light table was tiny, so I always had these piles of glass in the corner of the light table, which were 1,000 times more interesting than what I was actually working on. So I started to think those were the pieces, and I mean, it took sort of years to get it. I was just sort of doing it any which way. Some of the early pieces are like 7 layers deep, but now I rarely go over 3. After 3, you start losing definition. And I find the blue, like you can see on this slide here, this blue is like, engrave me, please. The red is splotchy when you engrave it. So this is actually blue engraved with a big piece of red on top of it. There's the red is a little trickier. So I tend to do the blues first. And then the reds are just the little details. So I have the layers facing each other, but that's just preference. They could be in any orientation that anyone wants.
What's the max size of the pieces that you can actually put together? Is it limited by your kiln size? Or?
Well, that is a limiting factor. I have a Denver fusing kiln that has a 20-inch square space. So I like stained glass windows to be made up of lots of little pieces. Thank God for Constantine, because I was stopping, like that bug piece, this piece. This is pretty big. This triangle here is probably about 14 inches wide on the bottom. This one. So, and they're all straight lines. So I like them to be little. You can, one of the disadvantages, of course, of working big is like that they break. And the more I work on them, the more liable they are to break. It's just a matter of time. So I like them to be chunks. Did you have a question?
I did. I remember reading the book from that was printed in Rochester pre-COVID, and you had talked about kind of your devotion to stained glass and the cost of that devotion. When you got into it in the beginning, did you have any idea that it would be so like kind of all-encompassing in your life? And if you knew it, would you still choose it?
No, I would definitely not have chosen it, and I didn't know. And I also didn't know anything about having an art career. And if I had known any of that stuff, so if you're planning on having an art career, plug your ears now. It's also ugly, you don't want to know. All I knew about stained glass was that I mistakenly thought it was this thing that I would never get bored doing ever. And it was like this, that was what I'd been looking for. I had sort of been groomed by generations of my mother's family to be a seamstress. But I also hate sewing. Turns out I hate every single medium there is except stained glass. So stained glass is weird. It's, first of all, I'm very rough. I'm not gentle. And so I might have been good at stone carving, or something that demands like, wah, you know? Clay, I just poke holes in it. And then like, you know, I do something really meticulous in one area and I've squished the other area. I'm like, ugh. The only other medium I really loved, wait for it, was 3D computer modeling, and 3D animation. I would have loved to have, you know, an extra lifetime to explore that. But it kind of had to be stained glass. And I'm glad I didn't know anything at first. It was very protective. 3D? Well, I did the lamp. My early pieces were really 3D. Some of them, like the surfaces, are really crazy undulating. I did this piece that had like 10 birds, and they were all angled off the surface at these crazy angles, which, you know, turning the piece over to solder the back was some kind of nightmare. And basically, by being daring and idiotic as a young person, I learned to be boring and conservative as I got older, unfortunately. It was all like lessons in learning the consequences of my behavior, which was, you know, now I just want everything to be flat because then I can turn it over and solder the back. Other questions? Anyone? Yes?
So you mentioned 3D modeling and then your current work in neuroscience.
Yeah.
There was an article in the Times this past week, artists create book covers. And they were talking about artificial intelligence entering that field. And he talks about artificial intelligence.
Well, if you go to my blog, you can read my interview with ChatGPT. The neuroscientist people at Penn love talking about AI. You know, I'm sure it's going to end horribly, but right now it's kind of fun. So I don't know what I think of that stuff. And I don't really, I don't feel like I need to have an opinion. I like technology, old and new. So I was surprised to find out that I liked computers at all. My dad gave me his Apple II in like 1985, and I ended up throwing it out a window. And then I wouldn't get a computer for years because I thought, I had no idea that they had become user-friendly. And so, I thought you still had to like, you know, type in / star and all this stuff to do word processing. And it was between, my Xerox bills were astronomically. So I was designing things by taking all my sketches to a Xerox store called Can Do, and when their Xerox machines were broken, I used to call them No Can Do. Anyway, and I would Xerox them in like 15 different sizes, and then I would flop it and Xerox them in all those sizes reversed, and then take them home and cut them out with scissors and collage them together. I read an interview with an illustrator who talked about how he collage things in Photoshop, which sounded like everything except the Xerox machine and the scissors, and I was like, that sounds amazing. I want to learn that. So, but I was really intimidated. However, for anyone who's intimidated by Photoshop, I will say, to me it feels very intuitive. It feels like an artist designed it for artists. It thinks like an artist. And I didn't have a lot of education in it, and I learned how to do what I needed to do. So it was very liberating. The only problem with that is, like, sometimes it's really helpful to see 10,000 designs, and sometimes it's like you end up with like, do we really need this many choices? Probably not.
So, is there something, the characters you create, you are much more beautiful than the characters you create. And I'm not saying that is not a beautiful character, but it's sort of otherworldly. And I was just wondering, is it autobiographical when you do any of this? Is it sort of an image you have of your life and what the world looks like or feels like?
This one is not autobiographical, because that's a man. I've been asked that before, so I have an answer. They're not autobiographical at all, in my mind. But they are like dolls that I'm playing with and that I'm identifying with. It's very hard for me to make a piece if I'm not fully identifying with the character. So I don't think of them as actual people, though. I don't give them a name and a life story. They're a picture to me, and they're always gonna be. But I am identifying with them, and I'm hoping other people identify with them too. And I've been asked about the sort of weird way I distort figures and faces, and I really don't have a satisfying answer to that. All I can say is that I will distort it until it looks this way, because I really can't stand it until it does. And I don't know why, but that is the case. And I think a lot about beauty, not necessarily of the figures, but of the windows. Like I would say, I'm scrolling. Like, I feel like, 99 out of 100 dentists would agree this is beautiful. And when I went to art school, I was told that beauty was no longer the point of art. And I've done a ton of reading and writing on this topic. You really don't want to launch that lecture because it's very long. I will say I think beauty is a very powerful experience that is universal, and that just because some modernists, men, decided they didn't like it in the 20th century is we're going to forget that happened someday. And I'm interested in sort of basically making something that's oversaturated with beauty. I think of those figures are very beautiful to me. I wouldn't be able to make them if they weren't. Anyway, I'm going to stop with there. So thanks, everybody. I really appreciate you listening.